Are we ready to start? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to this first media briefing of the clusters of Parliament. We are starting today launching this program of weekly engagement between yourself and the chairpersons of various committees of Parliament. We are starting with the finance cluster, with the 4 chairpersons that are seated in front of you. This is a strategic shift for the 7th Parliament in terms of improving our public engagement, of improving our public awareness, and through regular engagement with you as the media. These briefings are intended to deepen public accountability and bridge the gap between Parliament and the people of South Africa by providing unprecedented access to the inner workings of the committees of Parliament through structured insights into oversight work, legislative processes, and public participation mechanisms of Parliament. They are also intended to showcase the detailed work of these important engines that drive the work of Parliament, where legislative scrutiny, where government performance monitoring and policy implementation oversight takes place. So they also provide a platform for media engagement, as I was saying, that enhances transparency and accountability and enabling you as the media to explore in depth how committees safeguard public interest, ensure fiscal responsibility, and incorporate public input into the legislative processes. So to kick off these briefings, we've got 4 chairpersons from the finance cluster. We've got Honorable Galeka Masibugo, who is representing the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, Honorable Maswangani. She will be talking to you on the issues of enhancing fiscal responsibility, current financial oversight priorities, and legislative framework updates. And then she will be followed by Honorable Songa Zozibi. You know him. The chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. He will deal with supply chain management efficiencies, state-owned enterprise financial health assessment, and the key interventions and recommendations. Then he will be followed by Honorable Musi Maimani, the chairperson of Standing Committee on Appropriations. He will deal with the People's Budget Implementation, Future Financial Planning, and Public Resource Allocation. And then the last one then will be the chairperson of a Standing Committee on Auditor General, Honorable Walter Wessels. He will deal with the Aegis funding model review. He will deal with ensuring institutional independence as well as oversight enhancement strategy. So once they've all presented their brief presentations, we will open the floor for engagement. So without further ado, I would like to invite, on behalf of Honorable Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, Honorable Galeka Mazibuko. I know we had discussion about the pronunciation of this name.
Thank you very much, Chairperson of the session, Mr. Muloto. Good morning to the chairpersons present this morning, members of the media, colleagues, and stakeholders. Thank you very much for joining us today for this important media briefing as part of the Parliament's Finance and Economic Cluster. Today, on behalf of our chairperson, Honorable Dr. Maswanganyi, I have the privilege of reflecting on the recent work of the Standing Committee on Finance and outlining the committee's priorities for the coming months. The past 6 months have been exceptionally active for the committee, with a focus on critical issues impacting South Africa's fiscal stability, governance, and economic recovery. During this period, we engaged in comprehensive deliberations on key legislative instruments, including the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill, Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, Rates and Monetary Amounts and Amendments of Revenue Law Bill, and the Global Tax Bills. These bills are central to maintaining South Africa's revenue collection system, ensuring tax compliance, and aligning our policies with international tax framework. In addition to our legislative responsibility, we played a significant role in scrutinizing the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement, which is termed MTBPS. This involved engaging with the National Treasury, the Financial and Fiscal Commission, FFC, and the Parliamentary Budget Office to ensure that the revised fiscal framework and revenue proposals promote fiscal stability while addressing pressing socio-economic challenges. Through public submissions and hearings, we ensured that the voice of citizens were heard, allowing for a balanced approach to fiscal decision-making. The committee has also undertaken robust oversight of key financial institutions. Over the past few months, we examined 2023-24 annual report of the South African Reserve Bank, the Prudential Authority, SARS, the National Treasury, and related entities. These engagements revealed important progress while also highlighting areas where significant governance and operational improvements are required. An example of this oversight was our visit to Ithala SOC Limited in September, where we assessed the institution's challenges, developmental mandate, governance framework, and its contribution to South Africa's socio-economic goals. Such oversight visits form a critical part of our work in holding institutions accountable in ensuring their alignment with national priorities. Looking ahead, this week, the committee will host a series of key engagements. We will meet with the Pension Funds Adjudicator and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, EFSCA, to discuss the challenges in the implementation of the two-pot retirement system. This important reform aims to provide South Africans with access to part of their retirement savings during times of need, while safeguarding the remainder for long-term financial security. We will also host the entities highlighted in the Auditor's General Report for the finance portfolio. These includes the National Treasury, SARS, the Public Investment Corporation, the Land Bank and its subsidiaries, and the Government Pensions Administration Agency, GPAA. These sessions on the implementation of audit action plans will address audit findings, government challenges, and financial management concerns with the aim of improving performance and accountability across the portfolio. The committee, as advised by AGSA, has also decided to intensify its focus on the growing municipal debt to Eskom and water boards. Municipalities currently owe Eskom approximately 80 billion, while substantial amounts, approximately 10 billion, are also owed to water boards. This unsustainable debt burden impacts service delivery, weakens the financial viability of these essential entities, and increases fiscal risks. The committee will work closely with other sister committees in Parliament, the National Treasury, and other stakeholders to address these challenges, ensuring that viable solutions are implemented to safeguard Eskom and stabilize municipal finances and safeguard basic services for our communities. As we look towards 2025, the committee is preparing for a strategic planning session in the first half of the year. Aligned with Parliament's strategic plan and informed by the recommendations of the 6th Parliament Legacy Report, this session will define the committee's focus areas for the next 5 years. Key priorities include strengthening fiscal oversight, advancing reforms to promote economic resilience, and fostering greater public participation in the legislative process. In closing, Chair, again, on behalf of our Chair, Honorable Dr. Maswanganyi, I would like to thank the members of the committee, stakeholders, and the South African public for their active engagement and contributions to our work. Because without the public who have sent us here to Parliament, we won't be doing due diligence in doing our work. The Standing Committee on Finance remains committed to promoting fiscal stability, good governance, and inclusive growth. I thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and engagements during this Q&A session, as you are the most important stakeholder to convey the messages to our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Galega Mazibuko, for comprehensive statement. Let me just take this opportunity as well to recognize the head of the Parliament Budget Office that has got interest and support these committees on ongoing basis. Dr. Janjis, you are welcome. Honorable Chairpersons, we also have stakeholders that we have invited from various organizations that have got interest in the areas that this cluster is dealing with in terms of ensuring good governance, oversight over policy implementation, and so on and so forth. So you are welcome as well. May I kindly invite Chairperson Zibi to come and address you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. You're also a chairperson for today. So welcome to the club. Thank you very much, and good morning. And also, apart from the members of the media who are in the room and joining virtually, I'd also like to extend a word of welcome to the stakeholders that have joined us this morning. I think it's really important that we always extend our activities to involve members of the public and representatives of public organizations. So I also extend my welcome to you, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to perhaps just give a sense of what we have been doing as a committee, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, over the last couple of months, and then get into a few topics, and then speak about a way forward, recommendations on the way forward. The first is that we have had to obviously go on a bit of an extended induction process, which we've had to do together with oversight, because the scope of the work of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is really vast, I think similar to appropriations and so on, because while portfolio committees deal specifically with the departments and entities relating to that department, for these committees, such as ourselves, you're looking at over 300 entities that we have to look after during the course of any financial year. So it was really important that we try and understand what the priority areas should be, get to see between the work of the Auditor General, the Special Investigating Unit, the NPA, the Hawks, and other institutions in relation to the institutions that they oversee and assess and conduct investigations on, and link that together with the presentations that have been made to us, Many of these have been on the basis of the previous financial year's audit, because we only having those audit outcomes for the 2023-2024 financial year being tabled now. The reason it was important to do that is so that we don't just rely on the legacy report, we also get a sense of what the previous committee was dealing with, what the sixth parliament was dealing with, so that we're better able to construct a program for the next 5 years when we get to do so at the beginning of next year. So we've been on that process, and we've mixed up between government departments. We've had the Department of Higher Education and Training, we've had the Department of Transport, we've had state-owned entities like ESCOM, like the Road Accident Fund, like Transnet, the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, PRASA, and so on. We've also asked and have been obliged by the Auditor General in getting a sense of the state of municipalities, because service delivery happens at municipal level. Nobody lives in a national address. Everybody lives in a municipal address, including the government itself. The union buildings is in the city of Tshwane. So it's important that we extend our oversight right through the system and work together with similar structures at provincial and local level to make sure that we work towards similar outcomes. Now, we at the tail end of that, but obviously we continue to try and learn and see for ourselves what's going on in the system. But we're doing all of this in a time of fiscal austerity. The finance minister is going to get upset with me for using this term, but the reality is that in real terms, we're pulling back on budget spending, which means it's really important that every cent that the South African people make available through the budgeting process is used efficiently. And I will say efficiently because this is really important. The finance minister in one of his speeches, I think it was a previous annual budget speech, said the government is spending 1.5 to 2 times for goods and services than it should be spending. Now the conversation is about budget cuts in and of themselves, which is a really important thing to speak about. But are we getting the value for money? Could the limited funds we have go further than what they do, because we are paying as the government what we should be paying for goods and services, or do we continue to see inefficiencies in the system? Because what will happen is that there'll be a reduction in the number of commitments because the budget is not expanding as we expected it, would have wanted it to do, which means service delivery is affected. But the reality is that it is possible if we spend efficiently, we pay, we get the value for money that we need, that the infrastructure and other service delivery projects are conceived, planned, and executed for the right reasons and in the right way and executed on time. Then it is going to be possible to mitigate the impact of the fiscal pullback that we are seeing. So over the next 5 years, it's going to be very important to our committee. We're not just going to look at who has stolen money or has not followed procedure and so on, but whether the South African people are getting good value for money. In doing this, we are going to continue to work with the National Treasury, the Office of the Accountant General, the Chief Procurement Office, and so on, to make sure that right through the system, we're not paying 65 rand for a loaf of bread, for instance. I'm just using an example. Make sure that we pay what the South African people should be paying. But I mentioned earlier on that there are hundreds of entities and departments and so on that SCOPA has to oversee. So we can't look at everything. I just want to share some recommendations. We are going to have a session as a committee tomorrow to plan ahead, to begin to plan ahead over the next 5 years, not just the next year. And I think there are some important themes that elevate themselves to the surface. The first is that I think the electricity and energy space as a theme is really important. So it's not just the Department of Electricity, it's also the entities that fall underneath. It is ESCOM, it is the Central Energy Fund, it is Petro SA, and so on. So there is an ecosystem of organizations that we have to look at. The second is the water environment. It's not just the Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation that we must pay attention to. It is the water boards. It is the district municipalities which are supposed to provide bulk water services to local municipalities and to citizens directly in some instances. So making sure that that ecosystem is in good shape, it's meeting its objectives, it's spending money well is going to be important. The third is the area of skills. over 90%, between 88 and 92% of South Africans who do not have work either have matric or no matric at all. That means the Department of Higher Education and the sectoral education and training agencies, the SETAs, the National Skills Fund, NSFAS, and so on, again, work as efficiently as possible and they deliver on their mandate. Then there's transport and logistics as a theme. Again, it's not just the Department of Transport, it's the Road Accident Fund. We know what that there are big issues. It is Transnet, it is PRASA, it is the Road Traffic Management Corporation, it is South African Airways, and so on. So that as an ecosystem is really important. And then we step on to municipalities, which I mentioned earlier, because about 60% thereabouts of South Africans live in one or other metro, for instance, or major urban area. The second thing is that some municipalities live in the intersection of several sectors that are big employers in South Africa, whether that is mining, it's agriculture, it is tourism, and so on. So it's important that we also, again, continue to have to have an integrated program of oversight and information sharing and gathering. The last thing I want to say is that I think the general method is that we rely on the audit outcomes as presented by the Auditor General, which are usually a year in arrears. So it's information about things that have already happened. To the extent that there's waste and other things, is things that have already happened. One of the things we're going to work very hard at doing is switching to an outcomes-based process in the current year. And therefore, part of the reason we've been having these interactions, which are collegial and cooperative in nature with government departments and entities, is to get to a point where there is regular reporting. We're not going to wait for a year. In some instances, there'll be quarterly reporting in writing to Parliament. There will be at least one face-to-face engagement. In many instances, two, which is an oversight visit, as well as people coming to present in Parliament, so that we do not wait for audit outcomes to come out later, a year later, before we begin to do something. Because we need to work together with the executive heads, that is the ministers, and the accountable authorities, boards, and so on, to make sure that we drive towards the same outcomes. The last thing I want to talk about is that we really need to think now very deeply and carefully about the health of our state-owned companies. My colleague from the Finance Portfolio Committee spoke about municipalities which owe Eskom about 80-something odd billion. By March, it will be 98 billion. By March 2026, it's going to be 125 billion if it continues rising like in the manner in which it is. For instance, you've got in some municipalities 75% water loss through the system. So we spend the money, but the water doesn't get to where it needs to get to. There's water boards and so on. So it's very important that apart from looking at all of the things that I've spoken about, we also make sure that we restore them to a healthy financial state. That is going to entail some really tough decisions and cooperation between the various committees and the executive. But I think if we work together, we can get to this to an outcome that works for everyone. Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to. I think I've exceeded my time by some margin, but thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Chair. We were busy enjoying what you were saying. We did not even realize that you have gone beyond. Thank you very much. Just to also indicate, because we are also joined by colleagues from on the virtual platform, to say that the questions can be deposited on the chat or on the Parliament Communication WhatsApp group. So those are the two platforms that you can deposit your questions. Thank you very much. Chairperson Maimane.
Members of the media, to the respective constituency members, religious leaders, traditional leaders, fellow chairpersons who are joining us on this platform, and those who are joining us online, fellow South Africans, I think it's long overdue that, in essence, when you create institutions of our democracy that Parliament takes its rightful place not only in the exercise of oversight, but it's fulfilling its constitutional duty of accountability. The Standing Committee on Appropriations derives its mandate from the Money Bills and Related Matters Act, which empowers the committee to, in essentially, not only give oversight to the budget, but also be able to make recommendations and hold the executive to account. Now, that's an important principle when you recognize the fact that today you have a briefing of the finance cluster chaired by different members from different political parties. I think it's a historic and a significant moment because it gives you a sense upon which that as we have a configuration of a government of national unity, you can have now a parliament that doesn't rely simply on majoritarianism in the simplest sense of the word, but also that there can be an engagement that then begins really to give effect to the Money Bills Act, that asks the very strong questions to say, when the Minister of Finance tables a budget, in essence, that is in some ways a proposal, and Parliament itself passes it as a bill. So until Parliament itself has voted and agreed on the matter, that it, in fact, there is those counter relationships between the executive and Parliament. And I think this is an important moment to take notice of, that as a committee we've taken that mandate given to us by the law to ensure that we could really begin in partnership with multiple institutions that we work with, the FFC, the Parliamentary Budget Office, to then say, if the executive is proposing on one end, what are the people of South Africa saying on the other end? For the people of this country are not represented in the executive, they are represented in Parliament through their various representatives. So what we have to do is ensure that in the 7th administration, the long-term vision of the committee is to really empower the committee to use the full extent of the law, learning from international partners, to ensure that when the people of South Africa have spoken, there's budget prioritization and expression of their needs, equally so in the budget. It is in that light that even coming this Friday, if I can abuse platform, we will be having our public hearings, inviting South Africans to come and make submissions, so that when they give expression to the Division of Revenue or the Appropriations Bill, that in essence, the needs of the people are heard. Now, we don't want to do that exercise as part of rubber stamping, but we want to do that exercise truly to hear from South Africans. And as the committee has been engaged with multiple sectors of society, we've received submissions from institutions like COSATU, Y Capital, many institutions that are concerned with issues such as TB, etc. And out of that particular process, for example, a number of institutions had raised with us the leakage that occurs in budget through medical legal claims. It then became something that, as a portfolio committee, we were able to take on, engage the Minister of Finance, and in oversight be able to attend to the Gauteng hospitals to understand fully why, as part of the budget, a hospital like Baragwanath and some in the Eastern Cape are losing financial resource to medical legal claims, that in fact those resources should have been designed to be giving better health care to the people of this country. It is that practical work that we want to ensure that the committee eventually becomes more effective at not only eliminating slippages that take place through the budget, but to say, where is the not only probity, but performance of every rand that the South African public is entrusted to be able to have oversight over. It is important that when we look at this particular phase of our economy, or at least where we sit as a budget, that we look at a number of things. That the first is that when we reflect on the budget, South Africa has been growing at an average of 1% for the last 10 years. and that has delivered for us key concerns: rising unemployment and soaring inequality. Equally so, we recognize the fact that 50% of South Africans, or above 50% of South Africans, are now living below the upper poverty line, which means that as a key priority for this next administration would be to understand how we deal with the question of poverty. Beyond economic data, it's good to note the fact that on the macro, there have been some welcome interventions, the improvement in the currency and the rand strengthening, and also the reduction in interest rates. All of those issues, we would want to see how they translate to economic activity, with the key priorities being those: how do we achieve increasing employment and ensure that more and more citizens are able to participate in this economy. It's crucial to note, fellow South Africans, that for every 1 rand that is appropriated, 22 cents of it is spent on debt, 38 cents of it is spent on cost of employees, and more than anything, when you include and you aggregate the inclusion of social grants, it is not, or grants of some sort, it is not a picture you want to see when you are trying to allocate resources for the purpose of growth. In the debt component, the committee is deeply concerned about the fact that institutions like Eskom and many others hold the majority of that debt. And that debt limits our ability to be able to spend in other aspects of what we seek to achieve from a developmental point of view. So as a committee, we've had to sit back and say, yes, if 22 cents of the 1 rand that has been allocated is spent on debt, 38 on cost of employees, and much of it on grants, how do we create, from a parliamentary point of view, that the needs of the people of this country are then given expression going forward? Because we can all talk language, but as a committee, it then becomes crucial that we look at what each budget vote that, as will be undertaken on the 5th of December, delivers for the people of this country. We note the fact that learning and culture as a function has experienced the highest increase in the recent medium-term budget policy statement. Yet even well within that, it's important to realize that an estimated 50% of the learners, or at least drop out after grade 9, and those who write matric, 4 out of 10 of them eventually pass. So at graduate level, an estimate 3.5 million South Africans between the ages of 15 and 24 are actually not in education and in training. So we can appropriate money. It's important that we know what its ultimate delivery looks like. So with limited resources and an increasing budget in learning and culture, we need to focus on achieving the outcomes of delivery. Government spending on infrastructure to catalyze economic growth and potentially offer opportunities to more than 16.5 million has remained economically inactive, as the third quarter of this year, 2024, according to Stats SA, will demonstrate. So with all of these trade-off and limited policy choices, more direct and urgent intervention is required to grow our economy, to address unemployment, and that's part of what the appropriations, because when you give effect to a budget, you express what your priorities are and what your focus areas are going to be. We as a committee have made it a priority to look at a number of things. The first is, where do we go on infrastructure funding, and how do we ensure that more money is allocated towards that? We don't want to live in a country where the roads are falling off, the bridges are not working, the rail infrastructure is not working. Therefore, it's important that we invest into those. Water resources and energy resources, digital infrastructure, and municipalities being able to play a leading role and driver towards that. We're also looking at economic efficiency areas, looking at how well suppliers are being paid. Government has set itself a target of paying suppliers within 30 days. That has not been consistently met, and therefore it becomes important that we build an oversight that ensures that more of that is achieved. When special appropriations are done, that compliance is being put forward from each department on that score. So if you look at ESCOM, it may have a 240 billion rands or thereabouts special appropriation that was done over the last number of years to mitigate, to deal with its own debt. Yet there are conditions that are put towards that, and the committee focuses on ensuring that those conditions are met and where they aren't, that the appropriate remedy is put on the table. That like now, going into the next midterm budget, midterm phase, that the special appropriation that's been put forward on deployment of troops to the DRC, the fighting of the case in the ICJ, the expansion of the cabinet, and some of the international work, that there's oversight and accountability over that as a committee. So fellow South Africans, as we close, I do think it's going to be important that we look at things that underpin a budget. A budget itself can only do certain things, but if you don't have things that underpin it and make sure it works efficiently, that budget could be wasted. And so on the first, the review of the white paper on local government is long overdue. Why that matters is because that dictates what resources goes towards local government, etc. And clearly, as municipalities are failing to meet their debt obligations, some of it is linked to the fact that the assumption that municipalities can raise their own revenue may not be able to hold over a long period of time. We need to be able to review the provincial equitable share formula, or the formula that is allocated. For if you get statistics wrong or you get population sizes wrong, you have a deep challenge of making sure resources are being fairly and equitably distributed, and that needs to be looked at. We need to capacitate institutions. It's one thing to say you are fighting corruption, but it's quite another when you recognize that an institution like the Hawks is, for example, operating at 52% of its intended capacity. That when you go to Stats SA, much of the senior leadership is hitting retirement age and about to leave. When you go to various institutions that are set up for particular purposes, that we build capacity in that regard. You can't, as a trade-off, increase the cabinet, but we also need to focus on capacitating institutions so that they are more effective at doing the work that they've got to do. So the drum we beat in the committee, and Honorable Kalega Mazibuko is in the committee with shared competencies across the various portfolios that are here, that we've got to make sure that the people's voice is prioritized, and that ultimately Parliament does its job of making sure that the interests and the needs of citizens are given full expression when we look at the budget process. I thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Maimani, the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations. Thank you very much. The last and definitely not the least, the Honorable Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Auditor General, Honorable Voter Vessels. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and to the members of the media, community leaders and stakeholders. A word of welcome and thank you for your presence. And allow me an opportunity to briefly outline the focus areas and what the Standing Committee on the Auditor General is busy with. It's not a committee that you hear of often. We also dealt a very bad hand. We have a Friday slot, which means that we meet on a Friday, and that's why I don't see a lot of your faces there, but I have to be there. And my members have to be there. But the work that we do is very important, as when we look at Chapter 9 institutions, then they are paramount to the constitutional democracy of South Africa. And the Auditor General is one of them. And without an independent Supreme Auditor, you don't have correct oversight and you can't ensure accountability. And what this committee and the Standing Committee on the Auditor General has to do, and its mandate is very clear out of the Public Audit Act, is to provide oversight over the Auditor General, but also to strengthen and protect the Auditor General. We've seen, and we must be honest, that there's been Chapter 9 institutions that have suffered a bad reputation, which are not regarded as independent, which have a bad rep and a lot of impediments from bad media reports and scandals and so forth. The Auditor General is not one of those. Currently, it has a very good reputation. There's a lot of faith in the institution, and there's no impediments and scandals up until now. But we always have to still ensure that that might not happen in future. There is a few risks and there's a few threats. And as a committee, we are very serious about addressing those problem areas that might come to threaten the independence and functionality of the Auditor General in the near future. The first one is the financial sustainability. We must remember that the Auditor General is currently regarded as the most independent supreme auditor on the globe. And one of the reasons is the funding model. And what the funding model entails is that there's no budget appropriated by politicians to the Auditor General. The Auditor General charges audit fees to those that she audits. So a municipality has to pay an audit fee. And that ensures independence and impartiality. But currently we sit with outstanding audit fees of especially financially distressed municipalities, which are currently totaling more than R1 billion. Now, colleagues spoke about the outstanding debt of municipalities and entities to Eskom. A few years ago, not even 10 years ago, the outstanding debt to Eskom, colleagues, were not even R1 billion. And now we're talking about 90 billion, more than 90 billion. That's how quickly outstanding debt can escalate and accumulate and become a very big problem. The committee feels very strongly that we need more interventions on this outstanding debt. That's why we've already engaged with different stakeholders and especially with National Treasury to look at the funding model, protecting the independence, but also intervening on this outstanding debt that's accumulating and becoming more and more each financial year. We know that municipalities are in such a dire state, the majority of municipalities, that a lot of those audit fees will never be able to really be recuperated and be paid. We need to address that threat. We also need to look at what the outcomes, audit outcomes, the functionality of the Auditor General really means to the people of South Africa. How does it translate? How does an audit outcome translate to service delivery? We have focused for very long on clean audits. But what we must be honest about is that a clean audit only means that the debits and credits are dealt with, that there's proof of everything. And I always joke, but it's really not a joke, that you can get a clean audit and you will get a clean audit, even if you have the most severe corruption, a lot of wasteful expenditure, no value for money on your infrastructure projects, but you can get a clean audit if you have proof of all your misspending. That's all a clean audit means. And if we don't have a culture shift where we actually go and look at what the performance of a municipality, of a government department is, our people will stay in the state they are, suffering will continue. We need to address that. And the Auditor General is busy with a culture shift in that regard, looking at and plotting government departments and entities and municipalities with regards to what harm they are doing. Are they actually performing not only debits and credits, but how they are actually performing and delivering services? And we need to support them in that. And then we need to look at funds. How can we ensure that the Auditor General can do that, can perform performance audits, can and do not only fulfill a checkbox exercise of providing a report to Parliament and we scrutinize it, but we don't actually look at if there is not only or if the compliance is not only malicious, but that there's actual translation of money spent, taxpayers' money spent, and that translates into good service delivery and proper infrastructure, which we need to get this country going, to get economic growth, to get employment going, and to get inequality at rest. We need to look at those focus areas, and the committee is busy with that. The other very important matter is the Public Audit Act that was amended in 2008, which provides more powers to the Auditor General in terms of acting on material irregularities at auditees if an accounting officer fails to do so. And there's many cases where there's irregularities, material as such, but that the accounting officer does nothing to actually get that money back and to act against the official that was responsible. So these new powers gives the Auditor General that function. Once again, we need to support the Auditor General in that mandate and ensure that that translates into actual successes. Currently, there's been about 4 billion rand already saved or recovered or prevented in financial losses because of these powers that the Auditor General now has. But where the committee also has a role to play, and where we are trying to play that role and scrutinize, is cases that are handed over by the AGSA to law enforcement agencies, but then just don't go any further. We need consequence management, and that is where these powers needs to translate into consequences and actual consequences for those who transgress. Because these transgressions are stealing from the most vulnerable. It's stealing the future out of the hands of South Africans. And that's why the Standing Committee is prioritizing this and looking at all these areas to protect the independence of the Auditor General, to provide more functionality with regards to performance audits, and then also to enhance these functions with regards to material irregularities so that there is and are better consequence management. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairpersons, for comprehensive statements. Indeed, dealing with, as per the scope and the mandate of the committees that fall under this important cluster, which play a crucial role in ensuring financial accountability, safeguarding public resources, and indeed promoting fiscal responsibility. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are now opening for questions from yourselves. We have got both the physical as well as the virtual platform. I will start with the physical platform. You will be the first, Mercedes. You must know that you are making
Please
history.
don't harass me.
You are making history. No, I'm saying that you are making history because you are the first one to ask a question in this launch, the first ever cluster briefing. Is there any other? You will be the second. Lulu. Who else?
Yeah.
Okay, you will be the third. Yeah, just indicate your name and you should. You will be the fourth, sir. You will indicate your name and the organization you come from, and shoot in that particular order, and then the next round we will go virtual. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think it's an important gathering, gathering to be able to engage with you directly. It has never happened. Some committee members or even committee chairpersons, you can't even find them. They're not available. So this is something good that you're organizing Parliament. I want to come to it's Mercedes from SABC. I was listening to you, Chairperson from Scopa. You mentioned about the fact that, and you are worried that municipalities are owned billions by, ESCOM is owed billions by municipalities. Now, it's not the only entity. It's very interesting, but I would also want to know from all of you, you are finance portfolio chairpersons, your oversight role that you are doing, it's very critical. And, but the SABC government is not only, you've heard, they are also not, municipalities and government institutions are also not paying audit fees. But also, when it comes to the SABC, which is a huge unfunded public mandate, I would like to ask from you, what do you think about it also? And what should be done? We know there's the issue of the audit, of the, what do you call it, the funding model. But there's more than 30 million that is owed in TV license fees by government departments, municipalities, all the three spheres of government, some of them. And we don't hear anything. As your oversight role, what are you saying about this? Today, I wouldn't be here. We are here. We are the SABC. We have a public mandate to be here. Yet, you have more than 30 million that is being owed. We asked the chairperson, the presidency recently, and the presidential spokesperson said, the president said they must pay immediately and they will ask Treasury. So I don't know, maybe you should check if that money has been paid as the oversight committees. So what are you saying about that? And what are you going to do to ensure that, because that funding public model is not yet here? That is the first question. And the second question here is that, yes, it's very interesting, and we know most of the focus and of government is to ensure that you tighten the fiscus. And when you say tightening the fiscus, it means not giving salary increases. When you say tightening the fiscus, it's on service delivery that gets affected. And the focus is mainly on getting clean audits. And you know that workers don't eat clean audits. People don't eat clean audits in the communities. How are you going to make sure that they don't eat clean audits? These ones who come with all these clean audits, so that they can show that they've been, they're helping to tighten the fiscus, your role. And then you have executives earning a lot of, they even earn more than you, more than the president, more than you who does oversight over them. What are you saying about these bloated executive salaries of executives? You have, that is what you have. And then you also have this bloated cabinet. I would like to hear from you. What do you say about this bloated cabinet, you know, that of the 7th administration, which had to accommodate some of you who are in the GNU, but still you can give an opinion as to what do you think, should it stay like that for the next 5 years and so on? I think I had another question, but I will come back. The other one is about infrastructure. You pointed a critical issue around infrastructure, Mr. Maimane. But infrastructure development, we've seen trains. You are not a country if you don't have trains, if you don't have a well-run public transport system, especially the ones that affect the poor, the trains, the taxis, and so on, but particularly the trains. You don't even have long-distance trains. You've got nothing. So you are not a country if that doesn't work. So what should be done? We can be talking here and everything, because at the same time, some of this infrastructure, the trains, the roads, what is it, the rail system, when it is being fixed, what has been happening from what we've heard from PRASA, from some of the workers, when the train is about to start, the cables get stolen. All those things are happening. What are you doing about it? That is wasting government money and so on. So that infrastructure also, it doesn't help to keep on building the infrastructure, and yet it gets damaged, it gets destroyed by this. And we've heard it's the same people who are fixing it, working with people who are just destroying it back to get more. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The second hand was it you, Lulu? Yes.
Good morning, Chairpersons. It's Lula Mamaja, SABC. To the Finance Committee, tomorrow you are meeting the FSCA. I just want to ask, ma'am, on Friday, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority released a list of employers who are in arrears of retirement fund contributions. What would be your role on that? Because those workers are your representatives. When you were speaking here, you spoke about being public representatives, representing people. So what would be your role around that when you are meeting with the FSCA? Not only when you are meeting them, but if thousands of employers are contravening the Pension Act, what should be the role of the Finance Committee on that? Secondly, to Mr. Vessels, the funding of the auditor, of the Office of the Auditor General. The office is being owed, is among the entities that are being owed money. Have you engaged the AG on that? On that, how is that impacting on their work? That debt, and also secondly, do you think that that death is a threat to quality? Is posing a threat to quality audits? And lastly, to the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, you spoke about the mandate of the committee, that when the finance minister tables a budget is a proposal until it is passed. So if, for instance, maybe let's say by Feb next year, there is a proposal of increase in taxes, do you think that is the committee, will you be able, if you disagree with those tax increases, you will be able to say that budget will not see the light of the day? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mercedes, yours, they were directed, no. Your questions, they were directed at which committees? All of them? Oh, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Kolisa Yolasnyanya, and I'm the founder and director of Ulwazi Research and Ocean Consulting. I am here by invite, and I was actually a little confused why I'm invited here, but I see why. During the deliveries, there's very little that is spoken about when it comes to oceans, nature, which is a stakeholder in government, in our environment, and very little that is spoken about the blue economy as well. When we talk about transport, for example, we mention all the other forms of transportation, and we forget about maritime, which connects everything, our economies globally. And so my question today is, firstly, I'd like to suggest that we look more into oceans and the blue economy, firstly. And secondly, I'd like to know how much Operation Pagisa, which was implemented in July of 2014, how much of that is still in action, if it is at all? And also, is there anything that is related to the ocean and the blue economy that you as the standing committee members have worked on or are currently working on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. I think there was a last hand. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Bishop Templeton Mbekwa from African Religious and Traditional Leaders Council, the former African Religious Forum that was formed by Dr. Nelson Mandela in 1997. My input will be to the representative of the Auditor General Committee. We do have partners that wants to help the municipalities that are owing ESCOM large amounts of money. We tried MISA. MISA is one of the directorate in the Department of COCTA. We wrote them a letter asking them, how can our partners give a hand to the country in terms of relieving those municipalities? So my question, how can we go about through the government in a godly manner to help those municipalities? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop. On the virtual platform, there are two questions, both from Naila Ibrahim. The first, both of them are directed at Chairperson Zibi. The first one is, will SCOPA push for the tabling of the financials of SOEs such as SAA? Has the committee received any assurance from SAA as to when they will table their latest financials? The third one will be, you spoke about increasing oversight, particularly for SOEs, which will include quarterly reports and not relying on dated audits. Could you perhaps expand on how this will work practically? In addition, what tough decisions will the committee make regarding the financial health of the SOEs? I'm just going to start in the order that I've called you for the presentations. And then when she finishes, you can just follow Chairperson Zibi and then followed by Chairperson Maimane and then Chairperson Vessels in that order. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the question that was directed to Finance Committee, which relates to the contravening of the Act, of the Pension Funds Act, which is Act number 13A of the Pension Fund Act. As a committee, we discussed this issue. We even had a motion that was debated in plenary about this issue, because it is indeed a serious issue that needs to be attended to. That is why I mentioned that we are meeting on Friday with the Pension Fund Adjudicator and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, just to have a full sense. And we have condemned, and we are still condemning, the non-compliance by municipalities as well as the private sector, because the employer has to contribute and also make sure that the contribution of the employee is also assisting the employees when they take a leave or pension. And this does not only affect an individual or the employee, it also affects the families of the employee. Because, I mean, imagine you have worked for all the years, and when you are supposed to get pension, you don't get your pension. So even your family gets affected, and your health as a person gets affected. So we are taking this matter very serious as a committee. That is why we have scheduled this meeting on Friday to chart the way forward as to what should happen with those employers that do not comply, which includes the private sector as well. So we after the Friday meeting, I think we will be able to also give a full report on the way forward, because it has to be resolved. So the two-pot system has actually exposed this particular irregularity. And on the, okay, most of the questions were, okay, there was a question about the bloated cabinet. I think the president has spoken many a times about the vision behind the current cabinet. And I think as a nation, we should also appreciate the interventions that have been put in place, especially by the government of the GNU, to focus on specific areas of challenges we have in the country. I'll make an example with the Minister of Electricity. His focus on electricity in particular has turned the tide in terms of the problems we're having in the country. We have seen no load shedding for a couple of months now, which was a serious problem for the investors as well as the communities. So we must also look into the current cabinet on a positive side, that the difference the cabinet is making in the lives of our communities. So I thought maybe let me just respond to that. Of course, the workers do not eat clean audit. So it is true, and as government, we have a relationship with the workers' unions, and in terms of the salaries, those are being discussed at a level where the salaries are discussed. But belt tightening, looking into the economic situation we have, not only in the country but globally, it is important that as much as the increases are very important, but also we look at the belt tightening, all of us, even yourself at home, you rely on your budget for your expenditure. So I think that's all that government is saying. Government is not saying the workers should not be paid, but government is saying, let us be responsible in the way we spend. And as a committee, that's what we look at, the expenditure of the people's monies, because this is the people's purse. So we're looking at the expenditure. So most of the questions were based to my colleagues. If there's something I have forgotten, I will come back, Chair. Thank you. Okay, there's something. Let me just, sorry. Let me just address the issue of ESCOM and the debt. As committees, we've met with the leadership of ESCOM, the committee of Honorable Zibi, Scopa and Finance. We met with the leadership of ESCOM to look at the solutions in terms of the current problems between the municipalities and ESCOM. And I must say that the board that is in place at ESCOM has given us hope in terms of turning the tide and resolving the issue of the municipal debt. It is important that some of the acts needs to be reviewed, as well as the funding to municipalities. The white paper, as the chair has actually indicated, that the white paper needs to be reviewed to be in line with the current situation in the country and also at the municipalities. The share, the equitable share for the municipalities, the formula is under review. There has been engagement with different stakeholders, including SALGA, to review the formula to help the municipalities, as we know that the socio-economic situation in the country is affecting the municipalities as they are the coal face of service delivery. So that is also being addressed. There is a process of reviewing this particular situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mercedes, I'm really glad that you've asked those questions. It's time to be frank with everyone. We are seeing now the outcome of 10 to 15 years of bad decisions. The country is nearly, I don't want to use the word bankrupt, but it's in a very difficult financial situation. And the choice we have to make is whether we continue to borrow more against the future into a system that wastes and steals money or not. So the SABC is not the only entity that has a funding problem, a funding model problem, and a serious historical governance problem. We've gone through that. So all of that stuff with a born intellectual lecture and so on, these are the consequences that we're going through right now. So let me tell you who else has an unfunded mandate. It's a South African Defence Force. 62% of the Defence Force's mandate is unfunded. We spoke about the oceans economy. The ships of the South African Navy and the submarines used to spend over 11,000 hours at sea per year. They spend 2,000 now. There's only one operating. If anyone from anywhere wants to come and steal our fish, they can do whatever they like, bring drugs in and that sort of thing. There is no money for it. There's no money for it. And the Department of Defense has the worst audit outcomes in the entire government. So that's the scale and the kind of problem that we're dealing with. So that also means you will find in the same ecosystem, you will find entities that cannot pay the Auditor General, that cannot pay the SIU, that cannot pay their bills to the Department of Public Works and so on. There is a lot of cross debt or owing within the system because these institutions are broken. They've been mismanaged, they continue to be mismanaged. The SABC is one of those. But there are also those that have a problem with the funding model. The Road Accident Fund is another. So the Road Accident Fund gets about 45 billion a year. Its liabilities exceed 340 billion. That's the Road Accident Fund. And I can go on and on and on. The municipalities that are not able to pay ESCOM simply can't collect rates because they themselves administratively are broken and they are also in very poor areas. So what they do, they take the money from prepaid electricity because people pay prepaid, they use it for salaries and other things, and they don't pay ESCOM. So if that money, as it is possible to do, is taken from the equitable share of those municipalities, it means there might be some service delivery items that will not be done. So I just want us to get us to understand the extent of the funding problem in South Africa. Let me give you another example, last example. I asked the Minister of Transport how much between PRASA and Transnet is needed to get them to a point where they meet their constitutional mandate. It's about 240 billion. Just between those two institutions alone, 240 billion. PRASA itself is broken and has been broken for years. They should be running between Naledi, for instance, and Park Station. They should be running several trains per hour. But a trip from Naledi to Park Station takes an hour 15 minutes to an hour 20 minutes instead of 35 minutes. Why? Because there's no fencing. The pairways, which is the railway, the rails themselves, need fixing. There is no electronic signaling equipment, so the trains can collide. So the trains are really slow. They go at 40 to 60 k's per hour instead of 130 k's per hour. They get full. They get hot. We need to find that money somewhere. Now, Honorable Maimane told you out of every rand where that money goes. South Africa pays 1.3 to 1.4 billion servicing debt per day. Each day. That's how much we pay. It's money that was borrowed, wasted, stolen. Transnet has a debt, among others. There is 60 billion from Transnet that they owe, that they're continuing to service. It was to buy locomotives. They're not here. They were in that state capture mess and the contracts got cancelled and that sort of thing. So Transnet can't meet its mandate. It's paying debt to banks and pension funds for infrastructure that is not even at Transnet. So I'm trying to say it's very important that we understand the scale of the financial problem we're dealing with and the problems with governance and why it's important that we make the focus. So I want to say to you, to Mercedes, in response to your questions, I think one of the sad outcomes of this is that many workers who are under pressure from cost of living that is too high will go without salary increases because often they're just lucky not to get retrenched. The funding model of the SABC is going to have to change because it's not just the SABC that is struggling financially. Multi-choice, you've heard. Consumer habits are changing. So we have to look at other ways in which we fund the SABC, we fund the Road Accident Fund, we fund Transnet, and so on. What is clear is that there is not enough tax in the system anymore. If I were to ask any of you, can you afford to pay any more tax? The answer will be no. So where's the money going to come from? That is a fundamental problem from a policy perspective that the government has to. And South Africans also don't want any private participation. So we're going to have to deal with the situation that we have until different policy decisions are taken. But it's important that we explain how serious this is. I wish I could say something about the bloated cabinet. The problem is our constitution says the president, once elected, has a prerogative. He or she can have 12 ministers, 16, 60. It's not for parliament, unfortunately, to instruct the president on how many ministers they would have. If you were to ask me, would I have a big cabinet? The answer is no. But I'm not the president. And the constitution does not allow parliament to change ministries and that sort of thing. If we want that system, we need to advocate for a constitutional change and change it. But otherwise, it is what it is. So that is the first. The second that I want to deal with is, so Dr. Snyanya, I'm not avoiding your question. I just want to place our role in context. One of the struggles I have, even with our own committee members, is that we look specifically at how money is spent and how money is accounted for. The portfolio committees deal with the policy issues in terms of whether policy A or policy B is the right policy and so on. And in that context, we don't get into that conversation. If I made a comment, I would be giving you a personal comment, which is you are absolutely correct. But you also need, in terms of having to focus right across the sort of the full set of natural resources that we have. It's not just mining, it's not just tourism, it's also the oceans. But think about what I said about the SA Navy only operating one ship and one submarine now. You know exactly what's going to happen. Anybody can come and do anything they like. And that has got an effect on how we're able to extract value out of our maritime resources and to protect them, to protect the environment, make sure there is no overfishing and so on, no pollution. Can't do any of that. That's a fact. The third I want to deal with has to do with the financials, because that was directed at me. So will we insist? So we've been given an undertaking that South African Airways will table its audited financials, will be able to complete its latest audit by the end of this month. So the Minister and SAA will come back to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts next year. But I need to say this about audits, and I'll kind of try and granularize it. When you've had the kind of instability that we've had, and for years you have not completed financial statements, what's important in an audit is that for every claim about what you've spent and what you've done, there needs to be proof that this has indeed happened. That needs people who were there when it was happening to say that it was there, here's the memo, here are the minutes, and so on. This is what happens. How many chief executives and CFOs and so on has SAA had in the last 10 years? I lose count. So the difficulty for the Auditor General or anyone who's auditing financial statements of such a broken entity is that you are not able to ascertain the quality of the information from 2018, 2019, because the people are not here, 2019, 2020, 2021, 21, 22, and so on. So when you're dealing with a backlog of audits, you've got to go through this painstaking process so that at least you can arrive at an audit conclusion of some sort. If you don't have it, then it is difficult to conclude the audit. Honorable Vessel spoke about what a clean audit means in terms of your finances. It simply means you could prove the things that you are saying. That's it. What is often a problem in some of these entities, they can't prove. You look for certain documents, they're not there. You look for people that were there to explain what happened, they're not there, they're gone. So what I'm trying to say is we can force entities to come and explain before the committee. The reality is that the information we will get will still be junk. We must accept that. That's what will happen. It will still be junk information. And junk information is useless because you don't actually know whether it is true or not. But we commend the work that the Auditor General has done so far. They've had to do some of these audits concurrently. In other words, do multiple years at once so that they're able to deliver financial statements. And they've given us an undertaking that they will be able to do that. The final, so what I'm trying to say is that it's not just SAA refusing. The Auditor General also says, I don't have enough information to reach a conclusion. So you can go and say, but nobody can prove what you're saying is true, unfortunately. So we need to get to a point where there's sufficient information to accept the audit outcome that has been given. And that's how much these institutions have been broken. The final one I want to say on quarterly reports, because this is really important. I will make an example about the session we had last week. We had the Hawks, we had the SIU, and we had the NPA. The week before, we had the presidency. The topic of discussion was the discrepancy between whom the SIU refers for prosecution versus who's eventually prosecuted versus who's eventually found guilty. The numbers don't match. We needed to understand why. Then we speak to the presidency, which issues the proclamations, which coordinates the fight against corruption. So all of these institutions must talk to one another. Now, what do we want in the end? What we want in the end is where we get as Parliament a single report. The presidency, the NPA, the SIU, and the Hawks give us exactly the same report as to what has happened to those cases. Is everyone being held accountable? It's not just about a criminal prosecution. It is also about people that are being disciplined, people who are being blacklisted, companies that get blacklisted out of the system. We need a single report. That necessitates that we embark on the process that we did. Now, when you do things like that right across the estate, whether it is objectives, it is financial metrics, it is how fast you pay suppliers, whether tender processes are being run correctly, and so on, we are able to issue a template to each of these institutions by agreement with all of them so that they can give us good quality information. We're going to take that information, use it on an ongoing basis to ask further questions and to make recommendations to Parliament so that when we get the audit outcomes at the end of the year, we look at that same template and we look to see whether that what we've been told throughout the year matches what the Auditor General has found, and therefore what accountability and consequent management looks like. So I hope that that explains the quarterly or half-yearly reporting thing that I spoke about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll do my best to be quick. Ms. Mercedes, your questions regarding the SABC. Look, the SABC is a public good. right? We recognize the fact that its mandate is derived in ensuring that citizens across the country are able to get news that is accurate and all the function that the SABC is intended to do. I do think, though, it's important that its funding model needs to be reviewed, and I think that's going to be important because the process as it sits at the moment is unsustainable when you look at the appropriation that goes to the SABC. The second is that ultimately, intergovernmental payment plans cannot be a thing that is further delayed. I think that government has notoriously and historically, it's not just the SABC, but it's payment of municipalities, etc. Government departments must pay. Those are allocated within their budgets, and so there should be no delay. It's unlike a consumer who's making a choice between buying bread or paying the SABC. People must pay. I do think more than anything that, to Honorable Zibi's point, the industry is changing, and the SABC needs to be able to adjust itself consistently towards that. You'll remember the historic discussion about set-top boxes, etc. I have written to the board of SABC to say they need to account on issues of deviations because there seems to be an outweighed practice of deviations within the SABC, which speaks to efficiency of financial management. And they've given me a response on what those deviations were and what they look like. And some of it will require that we have a face-to-face engagement because there was expansion of certain contracts that I felt at the time South African suppliers could have provided the same services at a cheaper cost. To your point, I think you are correct. Looking after journalists, looking after people, public service in the medium-term budget has already allocated only 4%, between 4 to 4.5% increase over the medium term on public service. I think that in negotiations as they go forward, this issue is going to pose a profound challenge. I am watching at it over the medium term, and to the point, we've got to ensure that staff increases or salary increases don't exceed that point, or our budget is simply unsustainable. As I've explained to you, that 38 cents of every 1 rand is spent on cost of employees. If you add an above 6% increase on that, you are going to be facing difficulties because you can pay people more, but you can't have more people than being paid more, right? So you're going to have to make those binary decisions. And our view, and I've expressed this view, which was to say that in as far as the size of the cabinet, even now in the special appropriations, the presidency's budget has had to receive an increased special appropriation just to deal with the expansion of the cabinet. I hold the view that South Africa is heading fast towards a time where we have to make some tough decisions. And you can keep ministries and functions. I've asked the president directly this question, so it's no secret, as to why we even sustain things like deputy ministers, etc., etc. That becomes some of the reality is the rands and cents will force us to make tough decisions. So the question is, do you want to make those tough decisions when you don't have money, or you want to make those tough decisions proactively to save money? And I'm arguing the case that we are at a point as South Africa where we have to make tough decisions now, or our whole fiscal framework is unsustainable, and our fiscal policy cannot be funded in that manner. So to that effect, it's also not just cabinet, the bloating of cabinet. It's also keeping in mind the support infrastructure that goes with every ministry. And I think there could be, I am engaging with budget offices in the BRICS member countries to establish how they do it so that you ration it accordingly. I'm not convinced, if you ask my personal opinion, I'm not convinced that every ministry must have exactly replicable support given the size of its budget. You know, if your budget is this big, then your support needs to reflect that. But if it is small, as certain budget allocations, when you look at budget votes, I'm not convinced that you need to provide the same support in that regard. You know, and even cabinet itself needs to reflect on how it operates, in the sense that I was in Botswana for the inauguration there, and it struck me how not every cabinet minister gets a special car, VIP, protection, all of the above. In South Africa, the joke is every cabinet minister is like the president, as far as security, and it's not consistently true, but the point is we're going to have to think carefully about how we allocate resources. And so currently the appropriation is 600 million, and then once you begin to grow it further on from there, support stuff, it goes into the billions. And these are billions that could be used for other areas. So I think we hold a view that says that. The committee met and discussed in its report that will be tabled for Parliament's adoption tomorrow, that there must be a deliberate intervention that ensures that municipalities, particularly municipalities in our consultation with SALGA, must pay for employee pension funds. It would be criminal for someone to have been working in an institution and then arrive when it comes to time to get their pension, that they can't be able to get that because the municipality has not been able to pay. So we're putting together, as is practice, once it's adopted by Parliament, a directive for Treasury. Will need to go from there. And I think to your question about what the Money Bills Act empowers, this is one of the things that we want to be able to work on in the next, in this administration. Because historically, this is the point I was trying to make, historically, when the Minister of Finance makes proposals, they kind of go through. And I think now we're heading to a time where we need to really engage on these issues, ensure accountability, and be able to push back as Parliament. So what I'm trying to get at is that Parliament is going to have to do its job so that these votes don't become ceremonial and political only, but they become purposeful in ensuring that Parliament does its job. Because when it's said and done, no one wants to see what you see in other countries, government shutdowns, a war between the executive and the legislature. No one wants to see that. But at the same time as that, I think there needs to be better consultation and interaction to make sure the expressions of the citizens are being given effect to. Otherwise, Parliament will become a ceremonial place, which is the last place you want Parliament to be. When the state capture issue was on the table, the judgment that was given against Parliament was to say to itself, it can't just be a laptop of the executive. That Parliament must exercise its role in the sense of the apex of accountability for the executive. So all of these questions, all of these bills that are being tabled have to be processed properly by Parliament. And part of the work that the committee is looking at doing is not only to say, well, what are we doing about making adjustments? For example, if any other portfolio committee was looking to make an adjustment on their budget vote, for example, that can only be processed through the Appropriations Committee. So my invitation to other chairs, I say to them, come to the committee. The law prescribes. Our lawmaking, especially around processing of the bill, is prescribed by law. That's why certain deadlines have to be met. That's why you can't just table the budget when you feel like it. It is prescribed in law. The amendment thereof is also prescribed in law. So if there are challenges, for example, with education and it being underfunded, the Education Portfolio Committee needs to come to the Appropriations Committee to be able to make submissions so we take the matter forward. And it would be true around other related legislation and portfolio committees. So I think the process must be taken on board, and we must give full exercise to the law in and of itself, because this is a legal instrument with legal prescribes as to how we measure it. I think I've covered the majority of the questions, bar your questions around the blue economy. I agree with Honorable Zibi that the Transport Ministry needs to be able to look at its broader infrastructure on that. My job is to look at whether the financial provisions have been made in this regard. And all I can say to you is that one of the things that as a committee we attend to is whether any government program emanating from the National Development Plan, and you can talk about government priority, we look at whether there's a relationship when a portfolio committee comes to present, where there's a relationship between its objectives, its allocation of funding. And one of the key challenges we face up to is that even the NDP targets are not being met, and some of the planning that comes into whether some of the priority expressed in the NDP finds itself in the annual performance plans. In certain instances, we're not finding the relationship between those two things. So it becomes important that when the president or anyone tables any proposal, that it's given expression into the annual performance plans so that Parliament can do its job. Because if it's not expressed there, how do you budget for it? How do you give special programs towards it? And how do you ensure that accountability is effected as an outcome? And it's part of the reason I maintain that the NDP targets are not going to be met. That is now common cause with 6 years to go to 2030. And I also do think that in terms of their expression, we note the fact that some of the annual performance plan only reflect less than 48% of some of the annual performance plans reflecting the priorities that come from the National Development Plan. So I do think what we're going to have to be vigilant on is making sure those relationships are in place. No, and I think the virtual platform questions were not directed at me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and let me be brief. The question with regards to the impact of the outstanding debt on the Auditor General and the functioning of the Auditor General. In short, currently, it does not have an impact and a negative impact. Currently, the Auditor General is functioning very well, and there's very good financial management at the institution, which means that in this, for the last financial year, there's even, with the outstanding debt, there's a surplus in the budget, which the committee approved the retention of that surplus in terms of the Act. But there is a lot of needs for digitalization of the Auditor General, which is very necessary to keep up with the changing audit environment, and then also cybersecurity threats that needs to be addressed. And everything is about money. Money is needed, funds are needed, and then once again, if this debt continues to increase, we'll have a similar situation as with the SABC, as with Eskom, where it starts small and it becomes more and more and more. But saying that, we can't operate in silos. And the AGSA and the committee, by implication, cannot in good conscience just say, but we recommend that the money be taken from equitable share from municipalities and get it in that fashion. Because we must remember what equitable share is actually meant for. Equitable share of municipalities are there to fund the provision of free water and electricity to indigents, nothing else. And if you take that money directly from the Division of Revenue and you give it to Eskom, you give it to SABC, you give it to the Auditor General, you are actually taken away from the vulnerable people that need that money, and we're moving in the wrong direction. And I think the colleagues articulated that already, that we are in trouble as a country, we are in a fiscal crisis, and then we need to operate together. We can't sacrifice, but we have, as the Honourable Maimani said, tough decisions to take. Whilst we can't sacrifice that there's any loss of functionality with regards to the Auditor General, we can't at the same time prioritize the fees of the Auditor General, but not prioritize free water and electricity to those who need it. Prioritize environmental needs that there are, prioritize other important priorities. So we need to find a balance, and we're in a very difficult position. But we're also in a position where we must, as South Africans, tell each other that there's always hope. If we work together, if we prioritize the right priorities, that the spending priorities that's needed, we take hands and we work towards a better future. Chair, in conclusion, the Bishop asked me a question, but unfortunately that's beyond my mandate and my committee's mandate. And I think the Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance are better suited. But in my personal capacity, I would say that we always need stakeholders to engage and work together. So there should be a solution to that, and there should be a place for the community and organizations to play a role in this trouble that we are in, and addressing, like I said, those needs, the outstanding debt, the way in which municipalities function, and there we need to take hands and work together. It's the only solution. So I think it would be welcomed, and I think the Portfolio Committee on Corporate Governance is best suited. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairpersons, for your insightful, illuminating, very informative presentations, as well as the responses to the questions. I think in closing, it will be remiss
Hello? Hello? We've got follow-up questions.
Huh?
Follow-up questions. I didn't want to intervene to say, no, you didn't answer this question and so on. So, please.
Is there a question that was not answered?
Yes. You said this is an engagement. I thought you would have a second round, please.
Okay, all right.
For me as well, I thought you're going to ask a second round of questions, and I would like
Okay.
to ask some questions.
Based on demand, I'm going to ask that you ask straightforward questions. Let's not do commentary questions, and then we give the chairpersons that last opportunity to respond. Can I start with you? The questions that were not answered, and if you have got additional one.
Can you close your mic?
We can be able to hear you, Mercedes. You don't
Okay.
have to try to bully me.
All right, I just wanted to, Honorable Zibi, there are very critical points that you made, but let me start with Mr. Maimani. The issue that was raised about the SABC was about general workers. It's not about the SABC. And the question was about eating of clean orders by workers and even society. You have municipalities also that goes around boasting that they have clean audits, but there's no service delivery when you go to the communities. So in that context, I've heard you answering the question on the SABC. I've not really gotten the answer that I was asking. Mr. Zibi, you didn't answer the question. The question here is about government not paying. Yes, the public mandate of this department and so on, but there is TV license fees that has to be paid by government. There are audit fees that have to be paid by municipalities. And as far as that is concerned, when I was in that committee of the Auditor General, we heard that Treasury will pay to make sure that it pays for those municipalities. So the question here is that, what are you saying about the non-payment of the TV license? Let's leave that funding model aside. And I'm speaking to all of you as oversight committees, not as government. And when I ask the question also to yourself, ma'am, I don't expect you to answer on what the president says and so on. I want you've taken oaths of office, individually, your members as well. What do you think as committees? You are oversight bodies. So that's where, but we leave it there. We're not, and also there needs to be a differentiation. You're not speaking here as government. Yes, government, there's separation of powers. So government you are the one who does that oversight over government. So I just want to, but we won't go there. So that question has not been answered. What are you saying? This money must not be paid because they're waiting for the funding model and so on. Whereas when you look at there, at the Auditor General, Treasury is going to pay. And here you have a president who said recently they must pay immediately. So I would like to know, and I will ask that question every time when I come here, has it been paid as it said immediately? And you, as oversight bodies, that is why it's brought to your attention as well. So that will be the one question. And I also, there's the issue, money owed to entities. That is the issue, the money owed. It must be paid. Government must pay. It must pay the audit fees and so on. And then the last one is here on, you are talking about there is no money. there's no money. I heard you also, Mr. Vessels, all of you. You are saying there's no money, but you have to tighten. Yes, salary increases and so on, they have to be tightened. But are you willing, because there's no money, are you going to say for this financial and next financial year, 0 salary increase? Will you advocate for it because there's no money? And then the saving starts also with yourselves. Because there are people who have not had salary increases for the past financial years. Parliamentarians continue to get that in terms of, will you tell the Remuneration Commission to say, no, because of this, we will not have money? And lastly, Mr. Zibi, I heard you made something about, yes, and retrenchments, and would it be, it's almost as if be happy that you are not being retrenched. I hope I misunderstood you or I misread what you are saying, but what I read is that you say, look here, be happy that you have a job. Don't worry about the salary increase. Be happy that you have a job instead of being retrenched. That is not what should come from a member of parliament. I don't know, I misread you, but that is not the way to go, because that is what workers are being told everywhere, to say, be happy that you have a job, don't complain about salary. It doesn't work like that. So thank you, and I
All
wish you
right.
could answer me also around yourselves. Are you going to say you're going to take 0 the next financial year?
Yeah,
Thanks.
you had already asked that one. The last one, ma'am.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm a representative of the National Coincide Council. My name is Princess Chantal Ravel. I'm the Western Cape representative of that council. So my questions are very straightforward. Since we are not legislatively recognized as yet, according to Act number 3, we are never included in any budget. But yet there are things that are happening in the name of the Coincide. We know Coincide leaders are involved, that's with finances. And the last meeting I've attended with a department, Sports, Arts and Culture, the minister, the national minister, made statements publicly that there are chiefs and kings and queens that are getting paid. I don't know of which budget, but that placed my life in danger here in Cape Town. Look, I'm from the Western Cape. People are telling me you're getting money. I wonder from where, without legislation, without any budget. Then the Minister of Kokta had a meeting now, I think yesterday, in the meeting of the government with the National House of Traditional and Coincide leaders, and there were things like empowering women, youth and persons with disabilities, creating economic opportunities for marginalized communities, advancing constitutional equality for women. Where do I fit in with no budget? Is there oversight? There were things that happened with Minister Googling in 2013, where we had the Kimberley 1, the Kimberley 2, and we had no oversight of whatever budget was happening, but yet a farm was purchased like the Buckies, which was budgeted at 27 million, but the actual price of the farm was only 17 million. Where did the 10 million disappear to in the name of Coincide? So I would like the committee just to check who, the Department of Kokta, if they do these things where we are never involved because of legislation, where does the money go to? So that to me is a very grave concern. And the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Gayton McKenzie, said that the traditional leadership gets 70 million rand a year. So if there's no money, where does the 70 million come from? I would like to know that the oversight will see to that. Is it true? How can government make such statements to the public, to the community, and then expect me as a community leader to stand and give answers which I don't know where to get? So can you just kindly attend to that urgently? Because there is even the smallest thing, like we have to engage in 4-hour-long virtual meetings, which we have to pay data and stuff like that out of our own pockets. We sign forms for reimbursement. It's 6 months along the line, and many of our community members are people that's not even employed. You sign these forms, but nothing comes from that. So whenever it comes to Coincide issues, there's never a budget, but there's money spent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think whoever. Yeah, just briefly.
Yeah. Firstly, Mercedes, I think, to be fair, I did respond to say that we have made a commitment to say, as part of the recommendations, that government departments must pay. Your question about whether there should be oversight in this regard, of course, I will naturally, without even anything, will ensure that we hold, as we hold them accountable for where they've paid service providers in the 30-day period, we will also hold them accountable for whether they've paid in an intergovernmental manner, because certain departments don't even pay for their water and electricity, which perils municipalities. So TV licenses are but one in the basket of things, and I'm happy to hold that oversight. We'll call them on board. There's no debate about that. They must pay. I didn't hear the president's statement about immediately. All I can say is that it is budgeted within the financial year. It must be paid for. I think it is, I would call it criminal behavior when one government fails to pay a next one. I think it hampers the services of the other. So I don't think we can debate the point. I think I did categorically state in this regard that that must be done, and I will hold the oversight position in this regard. I think, to you, ma'am, I want to abuse platform. I want to invite you to public hearings on Friday. Please make the submissions, because they must be recorded, and the Appropriations Committee will meet here. And if there are challenges with regards to how you participate in those public hearings, again, I will urge that from a parliamentary point of view, we figure out the best ways to facilitate you getting there. But I want to say democracy itself enjoins us to keep on top of all of these processes, so that ministers don't go out in public and make statements. I can't speak on the budget of arts and culture. All I can give effect to is, once it's appropriated, that it is spent accordingly. So the commitments that Minister McKenzie has made, he has to account for those. I can't account on his behalf. But if there are representation of the Khoi and the San, which is an important constitutional imperative, I would invite you to public hearing on Friday, make the submissions, then we can make sure that they are tabled on the 5th of December in front of Parliament, so that we can take the conversation forward and so that it forms a resolution of the National Assembly relative to a lobbying process with the executive. So that would be my invitation to you. Thank you.
You forgot the other question.
Which
Are
was?
you going to take a cut as
Oh,
parliamentary?
personally?
I would no, I mean individually, all four of you.
Look,
I mean, I just the remuneration. I've asked that
I
question.
hear whether you
what,
want-
what are you saying? You say there's no money.
Mercedes, I think your question more specifically is whether you are asking whether I'll advocate or not advocate for the question. I've already indicated that there needs to be, at least there needs to be a public disposition that shows political leadership that says that we are in a fiscally tight position. Cut as much as you can. That's a reality, of which I'm part of the system. But I want to indicate the fact that salaries and adjustment of salaries represent one component of where this issue goes. You are correct, but there are big boulders ahead of us, of which debt is but one, 22 cents of that. There are other massive boulders relative to issues of corruption, relative to issues of wastage. So in the midst of all of the discussion about symbolically in a small component dealing with executive remuneration in this regard, let's also be deliberate about saying, how do we ensure that we advocate for dealing with some of the big boulders that sit? So on both fronts, it's not one or the other, right? So I again, when I look at the budget, I look at the votes that come through, we have to ask the big wastage program. Let me use a non-related example, for example. NSFAS, CETAs. These are agencies that in some ways do duplicate work. How do we focus on saying, rather than all the administration of higher education funding going through NSFAS, actually we capacitate universities to deal with students who are poor? That is part of the work that we've got to do. So I don't want us to walk out of here and say, well, the only thing we've got to do is make sure MPs don't get an increase. That is an easy one to do, but there are big boulders that sit in the system that must move the needle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mercedes, I'm sorry if I skipped that question. So part of the reason we're doing the quarterly reporting is making sure that creditors of all the entities are paid within the allocated time. Whether it is a municipality, it's a government department, so maybe I should have addressed licenses specifically, but I think I dealt with a group of them. I spoke about even paying for the buildings in which they are. They don't pay public works and so on. So part of the reason we want these written reports, there are all of these things that the Auditor General highlights to say, you're not paying for your rent, you're not paying TV licenses, you're not paying auditors' fees, you're not paying the SIU and so on. We're going to have those on a table for each of the entities that we put in our sample and say, have you met your obligations in this regard? And the SAPC falls into that category. So I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, but the answer really is yes, we will do that, because these institutions suffer when government does not pay them for what they're already doing. And I want to say, I was a journalist. Journalists are workers. Journalists are workers. And one of the things South Africans do is they think this is work that can be done without anybody paying for them. People want free news, they want free newspapers, they want free subscriptions and so on. And yet journalists and journalism costs money. They have to be transported, accommodated, do high quality productions. Your working conditions have to be the right working conditions. I don't think in Parliament you will find a bigger friend of journalism than me and maybe a few people. So my commitment to journalism, not just to the SAPC, is really deep. And therefore, from that perspective, I feel that we must do right by journalism. I also want to say, Mercedes, on the issue of retrenchments versus salaries, the point I was making is this. These institutions are in such financial distress that it's a miracle people are not losing their jobs. That's what I'm saying. And in many institutions, people are losing their jobs. And I can go right through the estate, whether it is Denel and so on, where they don't even have toilet paper sometimes. So in those situations where the institution is in financial distress, the one thing that I personally worry about, are people going to lose their jobs? And if people are able to keep their jobs, I'm grateful. That's the point I was making. I do want us to be, and once again, I will say the point because we don't want to talk about it. Money has been lost, stolen, and wasted. It's gone. It's hundreds of billions. We are in financial distress. Really, we are. If an institution is not able to buy toilet paper, that's a serious situation. Right? So it's important that we are honest with ourselves as South Africans. I want to implore us to do this. Because if we sit here and I lie to you, and I say it's possible to do certain things, you're going to catch me out in a few months' time and say, you said it's possible. I will not do that. There is a problem with money. And in that context, I don't think elected representatives should get salary increases when public servants don't. It's that simple. Let's treat everyone fairly. If there's no increase for somebody who works at public works, we shouldn't get one either.
Thank you very much. Let me first appreciate this platform. It's the first of its kind, and it's ongoing. This is not the last session. It will be ongoing, and appreciate the participation. Ours, and I'm sorry if I came out as defending government. Ours as the committees on behalf of the legislature is to make sure that there is effective oversight. Is also to make sure that those deployed in executive do account to Parliament. So issues that are raised here today have also empowered us as the standing committees or oversight committees. But also, it is to ensure that there is active citizenry. So this platform ensures that there's active citizenry, that members of the public, South Africans, do participate in the governing of the country. And these are the platforms, including the public participation. So we would really urge the citizens of the country to participate in governing of their country. Where there are sessions where public is required to make submissions, we will appreciate those submissions because they also assist us as oversight committees to do the oversight. So I thought, let me just, without responding to a specific question which was asked to my colleagues, but encourage the public to participate. This is democracy, this is the government of the people, for the people themselves. So for us, we really encourage and us as the Finance and Appropriations Committee is to make sure that the money, the public purse, is properly spent and budget allocated is properly used for what it is allocated for. And the public purse is secured. So that is our role, is to oversee that the budget is spent according to the needs of the people of South Africa. I thank you.
You didn't answer the one about the salary?
You're dialoguing as if we are writing a test. I think Honorable Maimane has responded to that. That is not just a straight line to say, Nongeba, will you accept the cut on your salary? I mean, as public representatives, we approve the increase of the salary of the workers once we do not get the increase. So for us, it's not about money. It is about serving. It's not about salary. It's about serving the communities. And some of us, sometimes we even volunteer to do unpaid work. So that is not actually an issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me be brief, but Mercedes, let me firstly start by correcting you. It's not that National Treasury is going to fund the or pay the outstanding audit fees on behalf of municipalities. That's not true. The Audit Act does make provision that where there's a municipality where audit fees comprises more than 1% of its budget, there's certain mechanisms that's taken into account and where there's then intervention from the National Fiscus. But that is what we are engaging on as committee. But it's not a general approach, and it's not that there's been such a decision that was taken. In general, we must remember that our problems in South Africa is not necessarily or isn't on what we spend money. For instance, building houses, RDP houses, they shouldn't be spending cuts on that. We shouldn't build less houses. But what we should look at is if I go and build a house, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house, it's going to cost me X amount. Why is it that government is paying X multiplied by 100% or plus 100%? Why? It's not about the salaries that's being paid or the number of employees. It's that there was a practice for many years. And I was a government official, Mercedes, you know, in a ministry. So I know. The practice was for many years that someone is appointed in a political office with no experience in that department. And then that person is permanently appointed, seconded to the department, but has no function in that department. We have a lot of those officials still in our government departments that do not do any work. It's them that we should look at, not the public official that does do his job, not the public official that does have a contribution to society. And that gets me to the fact that, yes, we must all be responsible. For many, many years, as a parliamentarian, I did not receive any salary increase. There were 2013, 14, 15, we received nothing. And that's right. And maybe it's wrong that we did receive a couple of years now, but we did receive increases. We should all reflect and a message of fiscal discipline. We don't have money, but there is money that's being spent on not the wrong priorities, but where government is being exploited, where it's not wrong for a government official to stay in a hotel. The media will criticize the hotel expenditure of the public official. It's not. It's a fact that a normal accommodation in that hotel, if you go and book it, will cost 900 Rand a night, but government is paying 5,000 Rand or 10,000 Rand. And in conclusion, our problems in South Africa started when we didn't care about each Rand and cent. We only cared. I used to serve in a provincial legislature, and when we, in the Provincial Public Accounts Committee, would, as opposition parties, make noise about 100,000 Rand irregular expenditure, or a million Rand irregular expenditure, would we say, but it's only 1 million. It's only 100,000. Where are we now? And that's why we should be conscientious and provide our oversight, not in silos, as committees together, to be sure that each Rand and cent translates into value for money for the taxpayer, and so that we do have a future in this country of prosperity for all, that we eradicate poverty, and that we address inequality once and for all. Thank you.
Honorable Vessel, see, if you can pronounce so conscientious, then it means you are ready to take an oath as a minister. No, thank you very much to the honorable chairpersons. I think this is really keeping, with the objective of this briefing, providing, you have provided, insight into the workings of your committees, the priorities, the things that you are busy with, and, actually putting out the important work that these engines that drive the business of the Houses of Parliament are actually doing. And thank you very much, really, for your engagement and for the presentations that you have made. And also, I want to thank the members of the media, for your attendance and for the engagement. I want also to thank the stakeholders that I mentioned that we have invited because of their interest in the workings of these committees that belong to this cluster, the National Union of Mine Workers, the South African Sugar Association, SASOL, African Religious and Traditional Leaders Association, House of Carlson, Ulwazi Science and STEM Research Center, Contralesa, Haikana, as well as Ian Stone and Associate. Thank you very much for making time to come and engage with us and engage with this important cluster that was presenting today. This is ongoing, on a weekly basis. We will engage with you, the members of the media. And next week, we have got the Economic Cluster 1 that will be doing the presentations. Those are the portfolio committees on communication and digital technologies, portfolio committee on transport, portfolio committee on agriculture, on mineral petroleum resources, on tourism, as well as the Committee on Trade, Industry and Competition. So those will be the committees that will be briefing the media come Monday next week. So thank you very much again to the honorable chairpersons and to yourself, good self, for your attendance and for engagement. Thank you very much. The media briefing is adjourned.